This is a very exciting conversation to have because this is the first ever podcast you've done.
It is indeed.
How are you feeling?
Nervous?
Are you?
Yeah, but probably ready for it.
When you were thinking about this moment right now, I guess kind of like the days that lead up to it, does kind of the mind wonder of like where the conversation can go or how it may come out?
If I hadn't been hit by a car on Monday, I'd probably give you a different answer.
Do you want to share this?
But my mind's just been elsewhere.
How crazy is that?
Yeah, it just kind of happened. You know how it is.
James just came into the studio and just really casually was like, I've just got a bit of an injury. And I was like, oh, how did you get that? He's like, I got hit by a car yesterday and it's completely written off his amazing bike. So actually, I want to start this podcast by saying if there's anybody out there who owns a cycling business and wants to support James's journey, please do, because he's in need of a bike right now.
I am in need of a bike.
Normally,
but also no pressure.
Also, please just give this guy a bike. And I feel really humbled that we're going to have this conversation today. I mean, basically, I reached out to James. I've been really inspired by his journey, and I think just the way he articulates himself and the work that he's doing is incredibly powerful.
And I've had moments where I've tried to put myself out there before, and it's just kind of backfired. Not in a bad way, but I just realized I wasn't ready, and then I just decided to take my time.
I mean, a lot of you probably will know who James is, you know, his profile. And I think, like I said, his work is being recognized on such a large scale in such a quick period of time. But for those of you that don't, you know, James's journey kind of, in fact, you know, I would like you to share. I feel like because of this topic, it's important that it kind of comes from you.
My own little bio.
Well, I just think, I think it would be really nice for people to kind of hear it from you rather than myself. You know, it all kind of kicked off really about 2 years ago, wasn't it?
Yeah. So I guess I'm 26 years old. Came to London, 4 or 5 years ago now. Following the corporate path, which is quite usual as a grad. And then just kind of knew where I was going with the next 5 to 10 years. It was just kind of manager, senior manager, whatever it was within the corporate ladder. Then all of a sudden, my dad just passed away quite suddenly, kind of threw everything on its head. Stayed within the corporate world for another year and a half while I finished my exams. Meanwhile, I was doing social media for the first time. I actually started it because I was just fed up of people getting free stuff, and I knew I could maybe do that myself. And then it just kind of snowballed. Decided to take a career break before everything actually blew up. And then as I took the career break, my social media just kind of skyrocketed. Realized when I came back that maybe I didn't need to go back to work. And then in my head, it was like the worst thing that can happen is in a year's time, I can go back to the corporate job. But let's just see where this kind of takes us. And I'm so glad I took that risk.
It's been really special, I think, seeing how things have unfolded. But I think you as an individual, you know, there's such a vulnerability to you. And I think your work is an expression of that. And I think it's really refreshing to see because I think it takes a real level of strength to be able to do that. You know, when you put yourself out there on social media, I think so many people feel more comfortable just kind of following the trend. And I think to kind of go against the grain of that, you know, a male expressing himself is something that we very rarely see. And I think certainly of a younger generation too, I think that the complexity that goes on within is just getting more and more. Why do you think you, of all people, have been able to express yourself? Do you think it's because of what you faced?
When I first started doing social media, it was a very fitness-based page. It was sort of like, this is my workout, follow it. And then randomly I just started doing these voiceovers, like articulating what was essentially in my notes. And people just started resonating with it. Like, it just went one video to another. And then I did one video, which was about my why and why I've done so last year I did like a 50K, I got tattoos. I did all these things that kind of happened because of my dad passing. And yeah, it just touched a lot of people. And then realized that I was actually all right at putting stuff like pen to paper type vibe.
You know, there's a huge amount of pressure, I think, on you when you offer the content that you do, because there's an expectation or a standard that comes with that. And I think it's great that you have that relationship with your following where you're not dictated to by it.
I mean, don't get me wrong, a lot of my content is quite like well thought out, and it seems like I've got a lot of things together, even if my content might say that I'm struggling or I'm having self-confidence issues, which I am. But I think my brother said to me the other day, like, there's actually so much more going on behind closed doors, which people just don't see. And like, I will have moments where I'm like breaking down, which is why I started therapy. And like, I still have so far to go. But social media is just a construct. Like I can spend hours carefully and meticulously doing these scripts so that it seems like I am, yes, being vulnerable, which I am, but also it probably does still hide a side of me that I haven't yet shown. It's a balance, it's a fine line. I try and show the highs and lows, but there's definitely still the in between grey area, which I'm yet to kind of explore.
You know, engagement is incredibly high. Your career is going down an incredibly exciting path. You know, you are associating yourself now with some amazing brands. But, you know, how are you actually feeling right now internally? Because, you know, that doesn't count for much if you yourself are going through something. And, you know, only really your family or closest to you will probably get an insight into that.
So people who meet me in like the street and they come up to me will ask me like how I'm doing. And I'm always honest with them. There's never been more opportunity for me and it looks amazing. And I am so grateful for everything that I've gone through, and brands working with me are incredible. And the free time I've got is better than I've ever had before. But on the other side of the coin, my mental health has never been worse. I'm quite a data-driven individual. That's why I did accountancy like the corporate job. And so having them at my fingertips on like Instagram with the followers, the likes, the comments, I try to remove myself as much as possible, but I just can't. I'm also an inherently competitive person. So I try my best not to compare to other people. But it is hard when you see people getting these really cool deals and like doing other cool stuff. So yeah, the mental health side is really hard. I also don't quite think how much I realized I need structure in my life. And so losing that element from the corporate job has actually hit me a lot harder than I thought it would. To the point where I was, or am, considering going back part-time. I don't know like whether that will come to fruition or not, but I think I just need a bit more structure with how I'm doing things, which is partly why I'm getting therapy to just sort my head out a little bit.
You know, this job is not a 9 to 5, and it's not a 7-day a week. Sometimes it can be a month consistently. Sometimes you cannot have days off. And I think that because you're stimulated and being stretched in so many different places, and certainly from a creative point when you're having to utilize your mind for so many different reasons, you know, burnout can happen quite quickly. And I don't know if there's necessarily a formula to help that, but I think just the awareness is the most valuable thing. I think that's one of the challenges that you are faced with this industry. You know, I guess the money that can be earned from it can be amazing. But I think there probably are assets that come with that 9 to 5. Well, it's never really a 9 to 5, is it? I guess you will always work more. I've never had a 9 to 5 job in that sense, though. So for me, I'm very grateful for the position I'm in, because I love the fact that my life isn't necessarily always that structured. I like the unpredictability of who I may meet or where I'll travel to or what I'll work with. I definitely think since India's been born, though, it's probably had to kind of go more down the route of having a bit more structure, because, you know, when it does come to pay, ultimately we have to pay our bills, and not necessarily knowing how much you will earn that year. I think as you get older, you know, questions can sometimes be asked, but I think that just kind of comes down to the graft that's within it. But certainly in the past number of years, I found myself personally burning out quite a bit. And, you know, from a psychological point, I'm quite I've got quite a vulnerable mindset. I think I can be quite easily triggered. So I have to be very careful with the decisions I'm making. So I can really relate, I think, to what it is that you're going through. I think the best thing is, though, that you have that capability to be really expressive and let people know that. Because if you don't, I think that's when you can go down quite a slippery slope.
I do tend to agree. I think I said to you when we last met that a large proportion of my following came from one video. And that video was sort of like epitomized everything that I stood for. And it was a really emotional one. I posted it the day of my dad's birthday. And so when it blew up, it was amazing at the time. And I'm so glad it did. But also people followed me expecting all my videos to be like that. And my videos are quite like thought out and they can be quite emotional. So it's very draining when that suddenly becomes the expectation. So when I then stopped posting so many videos like that, and I did a few more sort of like fun ones or just days in the life that weren't as sort of articulated, I did lose a bit of a following. And it is something that I'm conscious of, that if I try and push too much content out in the form that I do it, I will just hit a creative block. And then that's when my mental health just completely goes down, hit burnout. And All that malarkey.
When I first announced that I was going to do the Berlin Marathon in a wheelchair with my best friend who was paralyzed, I lost 10,000 followers. And I'm asking that question of like, what type of person are you to want to unfollow me sharing that? If you are invested in me as a person, no matter what it is that I do, even if you don't necessarily relate to it, I find that extremely odd that you would disconnect that quickly. It's not something I personally would do. But then I think as you get older, you start to realize that everyone's on a very different path. We've all been educated in a different way. Our environments can be significantly different. So rather than being angered or judging that person, I think it's more just like empathizing with their situation. They're just not ready to connect with you on that level yet. But I think with your consistency, it might not be a case of they're ready now, but they might be ready in the future.
I think there was a trend where it's saying like you're not the main character in anyone else's life. And you posting a video and losing followers doesn't necessarily reflect badly on you and because of what you posted, but that person just might not be in the right headspace to be seeing a relationship or grief on that exact day. And when I heard that, I sort of removed myself a bit from it. I was like, that's fine, take a step back.
There's an amazing quote of people don't care about you, they care about relating to you, right? And I think there are going to be times in your journey where you are going to transition, and sometimes people will want to follow that journey, other times they may not. It's the same with us, the relationships that you find yourself in or friendships. I probably like, you look at the group of friends that you may have had 5 or 10 years ago, your friendship group now may still be the same. It could be very different. There are friends of mine, Bud, that I have grown up with, I've been to school with, that I was incredibly close to, and I'll always have a relationship with them. But as I get older, I realize that we just don't really have anything in common. Whereas before, I think the connection was probably the fact that we went to school together and shared the same classes. Therefore, we had things to talk about. For me, it's like I like to have a deeper conversation sometimes, and a lot of my friends just aren't on that wavelength, and that's fine. There's no judgment there. I think it's just a case of just finding that demographic that are willing to invest in that type of conversation.
I think mine's quite complicated because, yes, okay, my old friends did drink, but I used to drink as well, and I didn't, even though I never really particularly liked it, it was still a big part of my social life. What I've started to realize and what I need to like sort of work on is when my dad passed, I almost like blocked off that entire first half of my life and everything that reminded me of like pre-dad. So like football, England matches, Euros, World Cup, friends. I kind of almost started from scratch. So I've not watched football apart from the Euros this year. It was the first time I properly watched football in about 2 years. And I think in the same lens, I almost cut my friends off, and it wasn't the right thing in retrospect because a lot of them were there for me when I needed them, but it just reminded me too much of like pre-dad. And I sometimes say that it was because they used to drink and I didn't, but honestly, they were amazing people. I just wasn't in the right headspace. And I think maybe because of that, I have lost some friends that in retrospect I shouldn't have. And maybe in the future I will reach out to them. But I just went through a phase where I just needed to cut everything off, almost start from scratch, which is what I did. And I've met amazing people since. But it doesn't, because I'm not friends with the old people, it's no reflection on them. It's just what I was going through at the time. Just, it wasn't right.
It's no different. Why is it there are friendships or friends out there that, you can go without seeing for 5 years and you just literally pick things up where you left it off? I think that's the beauty of friendships. And, unfortunately, there might be some where you might have that conversation with, but their maturity level is probably not there yet. And so they might reject that. Again, that's nothing personal. That's just where they're at in their journey. I think you speaking openly is going to help a hell of a lot of people, because I think this conversation is so unique in the sense of, I guess your credibility within social media, and actually just with the generations that are coming through right now, your voice is being heard and can help a great deal of people. Often social media is criticized for the negatives, but actually when you utilize it the way that you have, so many positives can kind of come through it. And actually, dealing with grief and being on that journey is an incredibly tough one. I spoke to you recently about this. I lost someone incredibly close to myself, and it's a whole new process that I'm just not familiar with. And in a weird way, although I'd only ever met you once, I felt closer to you because it was like I could relate to even a small percent, I guess, to what you've been through. My situation is very, very different, but You know, it's a hard one sometimes to really comprehend, and you almost do feel like a different person, and it's a kind of alien.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think social media is just one of them things that it is a tool if you use it well. So like Misha Grimes, for example, has made Just Grieve. And I think that's an incredible community. And I think she's doing an amazing job of bringing grieve, especially young grievers, together. There's another book by Rachel Wilson called Losing Young. She actually followed me the other day, which was an incredible, like, sort of circular moment for me. But that really put into perspective what it was like to lose when you are young. And I tell people that if they've got a friend that's lost someone, read that book because it will help you understand how that person is feeling when they're growing up and going through social situations. But yeah, I think all grief is different, and it's very, even now, if someone asks me, like, what do I do? How do I deal with it? I have no idea how to respond. Because at the start, I was like, why are you saying sorry? You like, I know it's a default response, but you've done nothing wrong. But now I find myself saying it. So I'm still trying to figure out what the best way to respond to these situations are. And I think the best thing to say is just look after yourself. Like, that is all you can do. You might have to be a bit selfish, but like, you've just got to be very kind to yourself in the first sort of 6 months or so. I mean, even 2-3 years, I don't know, people's spectrums are completely different and timelines. But the first 6 months, like, I was a drastically different person to who I am now. So yeah, just be kind to yourself.
You know, when it comes to age, you know, do you feel like there is enough support out there for young adults who are grieving? Or do you feel like it's been articulated in a way that you can connect with? Because grief is, you can't just generalize it and just say one grief is exactly the same, because I feel like, you know, you losing your father is going to be very different to the person that I lost in my life.
It is most definitely not one size fits all. So like, for example, I had Alex, my girlfriend of 8 years. So I had someone who I could heavily lean on during this time. So that's one perspective. You've got my brother who's at university, going out drinking, and has no other half. And that's just a massive pressure in itself. I can't even imagine being at university. Like, I was 24, 25 when I lost my dad. He was 3 years younger. You're still developing at that stage. Like, at least I was a young adult who was in a career, had a stable relationship, had a flat that he was renting. Like, all these things add up. And then you've got my mum, who went from having these 20 to 30 years to look forward to with her husband, who was her dependent, who went from having 2 household incomes to suddenly having 1 household income. Then you've got all the funeral expenses. Like, there's so many different things going on. You just can't compare. And like, for example, my mum, I mean, I don't know if this is the right thing like to speak about, but my mum, we lost my grandma about 5 months after my dad. And none of us have processed that moment because we were still grieving about my dad. And like, my mum went from losing her husband to suddenly losing her mum, who she saw most days. And she probably doesn't like even consider that on the same level. So there's like, there alone in 3 different people, you've got such a different grieving sort of like circle. It's just, you can't compare. You generally can't.
What would you say have been the best tools that you've had to utilize to, I wouldn't necessarily say ease the process, but help you get through each day?
Everyone's time horizon is different. So like, my mum, for example, started therapy within the first sort of 2 months after it happened. I've just started therapy 2 years after. My brother's going to probably start it in a bit. I don't know when. It's up to him, like when it feels right. At first, I didn't drink for about a week, and then I went really heavy on the alcohol for a while. And like, went on night out, like, bits happened, and I realized it just was not what I needed right now. And so I then went down the route of, let's just exercise profusely, probably to my detriment, and it became far too much of a coping mechanism. And I think I am definitely an overtrainer, and I really try and show that when I've done reels online, is that I definitely train excessively. And I am only now really starting to bring my training back a little and start trying to find other coping mechanisms. Because all coping mechanisms in themselves are great, but they can become unhealthy if taken to an extreme. So I got into running. It's why my page started. I started taking it far more seriously. It really is just me getting into like a flow state, thinking about nothing else other than like being in my body, which is great until you can't run anymore because of an injury. And then you go on to cycling, and then you get hit by a car. No, but like, I'm trying to find different coping mechanisms, and I think it's important to have a physical and a mental one. And my physical is always going to be running, but my mental has now started to become more sort of just writing stuff down. And that's where social media came in, was I find writing all my things down, putting it into a video, being creative, really cathartic. And it's really helped me.
This week's episode is sponsored by Runner. Runner is a personalized running coaching app helping runners of all abilities train for any goal. From a first 5K to a marathon, even an ultra marathon. When the time is right for you, your plan can be created within a minute and ready to go. With each plan, Runner provides all the help a runner requires, including strength and conditioning, and you can also reach out to the team at any time via the support tab inside the app. For a 2-week free trial on any personalized running plan, use the code PHOENIX. No matter your goal, Runner is there to help you achieve it.
My journey is going to be so different because having this platform has been amazing, but the amount of messages and exposure I get to people who are grieving because of it has meant my experience is drastically different to everyone else's, whether for better or worse. Like, I've seen so many horrible circumstances that make mine, like, technically look like nothing bad, which actually took more of a toll on me than I realized. And I got told to stop replying to so many messages because I was almost, without realizing it, taking on their load. Coping mechanisms are all different. My brother, my mum, and I have all had very different coping mechanisms. It's just what works for you at the time, and being kind to yourself. And if it is a bit of a vice for a bit, that's not the end of the world.
Therapy is such an interesting topic of conversation, where even still today, when people go, it's changed my life, or it's saved my life, you know, I'm a big advocate for it. I've been doing it since I was 13. And for me, it's being sat in a room with someone who's completely impartial. They're professionally trained. You have to make sure the synergy is there on an emotional level. There needs to be that warmth. It can't just be someone who's professionally trained and you're talking to them and you come out with it feeling almost like frustrated, which I have in the past with certain therapists. The one I've got is absolutely magical. I'd be interested to know, kind of with yourself, you know, why and when that period of time just felt appropriate.
So I went to LA, I want to say end of March. And I just was sitting in a cafe listening to a song, and I just burst out crying. And I think I am very good. I love traveling, don't get me wrong, everyone does. But I have realized more than ever that since my dad's passed, I love the stability of being at home and having a routine. Like I said about, like, maybe potentially having a part-time job. And so when you're sort of traveling and you can't control a lot of the variables, I realized I really struggle with that, and I needed help to sort that out. But I think finding a therapist takes ages. Like, I was window shopping for quite a while until I came across one who I was like, okay, this could work. So for me, it was just breaking down and realizing it. And for the first year and a half, I didn't even consider it. My mom said it numerous times. I had none of it. I just didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to know. Everything I spoke about with regards to my dad was logical. Like, none of it was emotion, talking about my feelings. And when I had my first therapy session the other day, it was like there's 3 pillars: there's behavior, thoughts, and emotions. I'm really good at explaining my behaviors and why I do certain things, like why I run and stuff like that. I'm not very good at talking about my thoughts and emotions. So they're the 2 that I need to work on.
Did you gravitate towards more the idea of a male therapist or a female therapist?
Female.
I was exactly the same.
Yeah.
The only therapist that I disconnected with immensely and actually almost resented was a male therapist. I just didn't like his approach or how he articulated himself. It was almost, and I'm not vocalizing this for all male therapists I don't want to discriminate against male therapists, but I don't know, it lacked like an empathetic edge to me. And I don't know if it was just by speaking to this woman of a certain age, it had like that motherly instinct or emotional intellect, I don't know, and it made me feel at ease listening to her. And even just like the tone of her voice, I feel so at peace when she speaks.
I think there is that maternal side to it, but also for me, it was, last thing I wanted was for my therapist, in my eyes, to be seen as like a fatherly figure, because I've noticed that when I meet my friends' dads or like my girlfriend's dad, I have so much love for them, but I can't help but see what I don't have, or like what certain elements they do. I'm like, yeah, my dad would have done the same or would have done this. I would have associated too strongly with my dad if it was a male figure. So yeah, for me, and also there is that side where my emotions, I always spoke about my emotions with my mom, whereas my dad was always just like football or like the sort of fun things in life, which I know is again one of them societal things that we might need to change. But that's why I went down the female route.
It's quite special, not because of the circumstances, but the fact that, you know, your girlfriend Alex and yourself have been through so much of this together. You know, she can really have a true understanding of you pre and post it actually happening. You know, how different would your relationship dynamic be if you were to meet someone post it happening?
The first 6 months afterwards, it was like I was still going about my things, but I was almost destructive. And Alex like was incredible. She was such a rock for me, and it's so easy in them situations to take that person for granted. And like, don't get me wrong, there's still so many things I do wrong as a boyfriend. Like I'm working on it. But her being for me during this time, being there for me, it's just incredible. Like she's such a rock, and I've become far more empathetic since it's happened. So I couldn't even give you an answer of what it would be like meeting someone afterwards. It's so hard to describe what you've gone through, and there's a lot of my actions that I do as a result of losing my dad. So there's some things that for some reason I just suddenly can get really angry about, and it's just not a very valid point. And Alex will bring me back down to earth, and she'll explain it. Basically, Alex's background is actually in behavioral sciences from Cambridge, so like she's really good at the like psychological elements of it. She's not like a therapist by any means, but she really knows how to just bring me back down to earth. And like for that, she's amazing.
That because of that time you've had invested in one another, is that even when she's seen you at your lows where you've lost that motivation, I think the attraction is knowing that you have the hunger and fight within you to get it back. It's a process.
Yeah, it is. It's a long process.
And that's natural. That's life. That, you know, this is again where I think social media becomes so distorted, is that you're seeing these individuals speaking about being hungry and hyped every single day until the day you die. It's just not, it doesn't exist.
No.
It just doesn't exist. There comes a point where you need to just press pause, and that's a good thing. And we need to start promoting more of that, because ultimately, if you want to maximize the outcome of whatever it is that you set yourself, you need to have that break. You know, this year for me, bud, has been a massive education. For the first time, I haven't chosen a challenge for myself to do, and I've never been more ill and injured in my life, and for quite vast periods of time. And it's a bit alien to me, but that is my body saying, you need to press pause. So rather than seeing it as a negative, I see it as a massive positive, because I can rectify that now going into next year and make sure that I'm 100%. I think if you can utilize social media to build a platform where you can spread a message but not be dependent on it, I think that's a place where I would like to be, and I think a lot of people would like to be. I think when you become too dependent on it, you know, you never want your income to be purely generated off the back of that. You never want your opportunities to come off the back of the engagement that come from other people. But I feel like you do, to be able to express yourself at any time, any place, I think that's where you want to be. And I think for you to be able to dictate how that is really important.
Yeah, massively. And I think some of them are just invested in what we're doing and how I'm going through all of these things. And like grief now will be with me forever. So there is always going to be that element that people are interested in. I think Alex and I were speaking about it the other day, but I just need to start posting things that fulfill me and that I really think provide, like, make me feel good about myself and provide, like, it's really easy to make your content about like going to the gym and being topless and all these things. And don't get me wrong, I have that egotistical side to me, and that I will occasionally post like topless photos when I'm on holiday and stuff like that. But the only thing to make this like it's for longevity purposes is to do stuff that you really believe in, like you've just said. And I think the people that follow you and they're investing in your journey are aligned, and there are synergies there.
I think that's where there's confusion though. You posting a topless photo, is that vanity or is that pride? You've worked hard to achieve that body like anything else. So why would you not want to share that with people? And you look at it in a different way, call it a thirst trap, whatever it is. But ultimately you are proud of the work you've put into it. So why not reveal that? If you've done a project, if it was a physical product, if you've created a physical plan that you can sell to a customer, which improves them, you'd showcase that with pride. So why is the body any different? I guess it's just, you know, it's an individual's ideology and how they see it. Again, the right person will understand that.
I know. I think I grew up with sort of And I think a few people have touched on this recently, but I grew up with like Steve Cook and stuff being these pinnacles of fitness. And I went down an absolute pit of tracking my calories so severe, like so cleanly, and exercising so much that I became so unhealthy. But because I was ripped, everyone thought it was all right. And I just don't want to I'm conscious that if I put myself out there and I'm in this, and by the way, as a sort of like influencer / online coach, you have so much time to work out. Like you cannot compare to someone who has a 9 to 5 anymore. So when I'm posting these photos, I'm conscious of that when I was that person that looked at them and I was like, bloody hell, like I'm never going to reach that. And I hated that side. And I think maybe that is something I just need to get over because yeah, I built it and it's great. But that's just how I see it.
I think you're right. I think when you're creating content and a person comes away from that feeling negatively, you have an opportunity to rectify that. And that really does come down to the written word. And that's an asset that you have more than most. And I think it's just utilizing that so you can express it. And then really it's down to the person whether they have the attention span past the 3-second mark or whatever it is nowadays on a post to actually take the time to read that.
I do wish people read captions more. And I have unfortunately stopped writing as long a captions as I used. You look at my first when I first started doing voiceovers, all my captions was like generally 300-400 words long. And people were invested in me because of my captions. And I have definitely changed that element of it. Because it is hard at some points to give in to the fact that you maybe need to do like a bit of clickbait at the start to get that engagement. Because at the end of the day, the engagement's what gets you the brand deals, which gets you the money. And it's how you make a living. But I don't think I've made a reel or a TikTok on food ever. Because it generally took me about 5 years of a million different diets to realize what worked for me, because I thought that chicken and rice or fasting until 11 a.m. was the way forward. And even though I think that I found a really healthy balance, I think people just need to find what works for them themselves. And I'm just so conscious that I'm not a qualified nutritionist. And so I don't want to put information out. Like if you look at the content that I produce, it's not opinionated. It's giving my thoughts on matters about myself and self-reflection, but I never polarize people because like it's just such a dangerous game to play. And so that's what I'm kind of conscious of with when I post like topless photos. Like I think someone said it's like soft vanity. The way I do it is like I'll do reels that'll have me being topless, and like that's a good way of putting it because like I am proud of my body. Like I do work hard for it, but I find it very hard to do what some athletes do on social media.
I mean, of course, there's going to be individuals out there that they think purely the value of themselves is the physical, right? And not actually what goes on within here.
If I had some of their rigs, I'd probably think the same.
Do you know what? But you know what? That's the asset that they have, and they're making the most of it. And if that gives them a career and they're fulfilled from it, then amazing. There's zero questions around that. I think if I was to have a magic wand right now, and you know you've been really open about your psychological state, if I was to give you this opportunity with this wand, and I was to say, right, I could change your life right now to make you that happy version of yourself that you're striving to be, what would that entail?
Happiness is inherently linked to purpose. And I think I do have purpose in a lot of elements of my life. And I never really know if you find like true purpose. I think I spoke to you about this. When I speak to like Ben from Runner or people who are doing these amazing like startups, they wake up, all they think about is this one thing. Like it's the front of their mind because they want to build it and they're so passionate about it. That's what I want, but also I don't know if that will necessarily bring me happiness because that in itself will bring me more stresses. So I think I would love to have a family one day. And I think from like what I've learned from my dad passing and stuff is that family, Alex, my friends, like that is when I'm happiness. That is when I'm happiness. That is when I'm happiest. Like obviously I care if like my social media page does well, but it's so short-lived. Like it's not true happiness. It's just a dopamine spike in my head. So for me, it's just like, it's building a family. It's like having a dog. It's these really simple things that you can just rely on.
3 things that stand out for me in probably the last month that have made me my happiest. One is every time I go to bed with Indy, like we lay there and before she goes to sleep, we just chat for like 10 minutes and it can be about anything. And there's just so much beauty in listening to a child just express themselves. And I feel so grateful every time we have those conversations that I'm a dad and that I'm able to have that with her. Second is my dad is getting to of an age now where, you know, I worry about him, and you know, I do think to myself, like, is this potentially his last year? And so every time I'm with him, I feel unbelievably grateful that we have one more time. And it was something as small as we were walking to a restaurant and he was holding India's hand again. And I just think that beautiful moment of, and again, of gratitude where I'm like, I get to witness my dad holding my beautiful little girl's hand to that. And the third was, for the first time in like 3 years, I was sat on a bench at a wedding with four of my oldest friends from school. And the beauty of this relationship is that none of it, we have nothing in common at all. One loves rock music, the other one like hardcore dubstep, the other one's a sailor. Like, it's bizarre, the dynamic, but just the beauty of that relationship is that we just pick up from where we left off, and just the laughter. And again, just the simplicity of being on that bench, and just gratitude that after all these years, we still are able to connect and be able to pick up from where we left off. And I just think, just if I can continue to have those types of moments in my life, then I will forever be a happy person.
And it's the hard part's realizing you're in them moments, right? I think the gratitude that has come from grief has been the best thing ever to come from it. And it is one of the things where, like, if I could take everything back in an instant, I probably would. But it's given you sort of a new perspective on everything. But I am just still I find it so hard to realize when I'm actually living in the moment, and then it becomes a memory before you realize it.
Yeah, I think you just touched on it there. I think that's a really powerful thing. Something that I live by now is that when Tano, my best friend, was paralyzed from this motorbike accident, he was told he'd never walk again. His life was changed forever. You know, in his eyes, you know, initially he was like, I'm not the person I once was. And then he started to connect with all these individuals that were equally going through the same that he was. And he was having such a profound impact on their life and changing their futures. And I remember sat with him one evening and I said, but if I gave you an opportunity to go back in time and change what happened to you, would you do it? And he went, absolutely not. He said, I am who I am right now, and I wouldn't change it for the world, because would I be achieving or doing the things I am today had that not happened? He went, no, I wouldn't. I'd be a very different version of myself. And so I think for me, I look back at the hardships that I faced, and although I would wish they never had happened, they have. But in a weird way, I'm really grateful for them, because they forged the person that I am today. And I look at you now, Bud, and I think what you've been through too, and they are forging the person that you are. And I just think the relationships that you're going to have with your children in time, hopefully that's going to be with Alex. Shout out Alex.
Yeah. It will be.
It will be. That's a dead set. You know, and just the relationships you're going to have with your family, your friends, the direction in which your career is going to take. You know, I think everything that has happened will just lead you to these unbelievable things.
I mean, hopefully. It's really hard because, like, obviously everyone's circumstances are different. And I have no idea where I would be if my dad was still here. I'd probably still be at my old job, like working my way up the corporate ladder. I wouldn't. It's actually, as a cruel twist of fate, I'm probably one of them people who would have deleted social media if it wasn't for it now becoming my career. Just because of it's always had a bad impact on my mental health. But yeah, I agree. I think the direction my life has gone now, I would never have imagined, and it is a cruel gift of my dad passing.
It is. You know, we're given these gifts and they're not always gifts that we necessarily want, but unfortunately that's just what life gives you, right? Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not, and how we respond to it or how we utilize those gifts, you know, we can turn the shittest gift in the world into something special. But I think it takes time and it takes real strength to be able to do that. What does the future actually look like for you right now? Does that come from a personal place of I just want to be happy, or is that there is a set empire that I would love to build and a certain type of person that hopefully I can impact?
I think for me, I want to build like PB and Jam as like my like community and my business, but I'm looking more at like, we're going to build a family soon, all that kind of stuff. Like, there's just Alex and I are getting to that scary age where if I propose tomorrow, like she'd probably say yeah. I mean, I bloody hope she'd say yes. So it's just like
you applied that scene now. God, she wasn't even thinking about it. She is now.
So it's just like all these like adult things like marriage and kids and like buying a house. We're not rushed. Like, me and Alex and I have spoken about it. It could be 3 years. It could be next year that I propose. It could be 3 years. It could be 5 years. Like, obviously, there's the element of like having to have a child before a certain age. But we're just not rushed. So it's really hard for me to say I want a certain thing when any of these things could happen. I'm just happy to be where I am, and I just want to keep helping people. Well, try to.
It's so versatile, just your investment into things, I guess exploring different avenues with high rocks, with running, with cycling. You have become, in a sense, I know this term hybrid seems to be thrown around quite a lot. I mean, what even that means anymore, I don't know. It just feels
It's
like
taken us 45 minutes to get to that topic.
if there are people that are going to be running right now, or they'll be sat in their corporate jobs listening to this conversation, and it's about educating, it's about inspiring or humoring them in some capacity, or distracting them from the world for 45 minutes. We could sit here and talk about data all day long, but I don't know how long this podcast is going to last for. And I'm hoping to build something quite special with this, but I think it's great that you do invest in so many different things. Do you find with cycling or running or high rocks, you get a different type of fulfillment from that? Because I think for the listener, so many people are contemplating starting something right now. And it does feel like those three sports in particular seem to be having a bit of a moment.
I think I've done that. I did that typical sort of journey of went to university. So I did like football and athletics growing up was my background. Went to university and very much focused on bodybuilding for about 3 years. I did football alongside it, but it was mainly bodybuilding. And then I switched to functional fitness functional fitness, hybrid, whatever you want to call it, about 4 or 5 years ago. And it was very balanced. Still wanted to get big in the gym, still wanted to run fast. And now my whole ethos, I now actually hate going to the gym. It's like the worst part of my training week because I love running so much. And running is, I've said it before in a few reels, but it's one of them tangible sports where if you put the hard work in, you will reap the rewards. I think weights, like when you're weightlifting, it is very easy to hit a plateau where you can't bench past 100 kilograms for a while. And it's very easy to get disheartened, which you shouldn't, but it is. And so having that extra element of cycling or running or swimming and like all these different modalities, there's always so much room for improvement. And at the end of the day, like humans inherently just want to improve. That's what makes us want to do better and continue something. So I think that's why I end up doing like the hybrid fitness side of things. This is because it gives you so many options. And then I think the other side is like, I will never be the strongest person ever. Like some of the people that I hang around with who do CrossFit are insanely strong, like Jake Seymour and people like that. And I will never be an incredible runner like Tommy Trees and Gabriel. Like they're incredible runners, but I can be a pretty decent weightlifter and a pretty decent runner. And I quite like that I'm doing both of them. And also, I think endurance, there's a study, not a study, but it was said in a podcast about there's a link between people who have gone through trauma and doing endurance sports. And I can completely understand why. Like there's something about just like if your mind isn't completely sound, pushing your body at the time is just a very good replacement.
How's your mindset though when you go through it?
I quite like finding a hole and just sitting in it, which I think is why High Rocks is so good, because if you really push it, you really do just find yourself in an absolute pit. I think when I run, so I used to never ever run with headphones, and I still don't that frequently because I like just listening to my breath, getting into the flow state, and just kind of for like 10, 15K, whatever it is, just being present. So that's like the mindset side of it where I'm like, okay, I just need this for peace of mind. And then I guess the races are just to see how much I can push myself. And there's nothing quite like runners high. After you finish 10K race on Sunday, like that was unreal. Like you put yourself to the absolute limits and you reap the rewards afterwards.
Something that I'm very incredibly proud of, a friend of mine, Ryan Libby, came on the podcast, and a lot of people had a perception of him because of television, and it was wrong. He's produced in a certain way, and he's never really been one to kind of share his truth. And a bit like yourself, he was dubious about maybe doing it, and it was about timing and maybe with the right person. And he came and he spoke his truth and was so open about how he felt and what he's been through. And the reaction is something that I've never seen before. It was so substantial, and the confidence that has given him, it could potentially change his life in some respects in terms of what he will now go on to do with that. I'm not referencing that in the sense that, the outcome will be the same with you. But, I think people really tune into these conversations because, like I said, it's not about clickbait, and we're not just talking about bollocks, quite frankly. You know, these are really heartfelt topics of conversation. And when somebody's running and they listen to this, even though they may not have necessarily felt or been subjected to grief, it's something that they can still learn from. And there are so many different sides to you that they would have heard in this conversation that they wouldn't have known before, because really they only get a small slice of you, which is a minute and a half or 2 minutes, depending on what the reel is that you create or a caption that you write within it. But like you said, how frequently are they going to actually read the entire caption? So I really do hope that they are going to get to see a completely different side to you. And I just, you know, on a personal point, Bud, I feel very honored and privileged to have you on and for you to open up the way that you did, because, you know, you've only met me once, you don't really know me, and to have these sorts of conversations, something that's so personal and sensitive, you want it to be handled well. And I really do hope that I've managed to do that for you today. And I just want to say thank you so much for coming on. It's been a conversation that personally I have absolutely loved. And, you know, I want you to know how invested I am in you as a person.
No, thanks to you too. I think the whole point of this is making me feel like I'm in a safe space, and I do. So, yeah, right back at you.
Big love, brother. Thank you so much. And we are so excited to see what the future has in store.
Me too.
Oh,
nice.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, you fatted biscuit, all I ask of you in return is that you push that subscribe button and leave a review. Unless it's a bad one, you can keep that, you sausage. Your support, though, makes such a difference to this podcast and enables it to grow and connect with even more people around the world.